He is the lead singer of the band that would go on to sell over 15 million albums worldwide, including several multi-platinum albums and great hit singles, and he's got a great solo project that he's working on right now. Mr. Tom Keifer of Cinderella. Tom, how we doing tonight?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing?
Good, buddy. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on the show tonight. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
Oh, absolutely, Tom. And so, Tom, I knew you grew up in Springfield, Pennsylvania, and you were in quite a few different bands before Cinderella came on the scene. Is that correct? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I started playing actually in the club scene in the Philadelphia and South Jersey area when I was still in high school. I was on what they called work-study program, and that's where the school thinks you leave school at 11 a.m. and go work a job. And what I was doing was I was going home and going to sleep, and then getting up around dinner time and eating, and then going playing all the clubs down in South Jersey. I started then, so I played in multiple cover bands, and in that area there was a huge scene back then. And then I eventually got tired of playing cover songs and started writing other music, and that's around the time that Cinderella formed.
I've heard mixed stories about this, Tom. I've heard that Gene Simmons and John Bon Jovi were kind of instrumental on helping the band in the early days. Is that correct?
Well, Gene took the interest first, and I've been kind of starting to tell that story lately because I just, for some reason or another, I think it's because the press always asks me about John. We haven't really mentioned Gene that much, but Gene actually took the interest first back in the early 80s and shopped us around and tried to get a deal, and it didn't pan out with Gene. But and then a couple of years later, John saw us in a club, and his interest did lead to a record deal. So over the years, the press always asks about John, and the story of Gene taking the interest in the band has kind of gone by the wayside. So recently, some fans actually pointed that out to me on Twitter, and I was like, oh man, we've never really told the story of how Gene took an interest too. So the bottom line is really grateful to both of them for the interest they took in the early days for us and the encouragement that Gene gave us, and so it was very cool.
I always love the stories behind the music, Tom, because everybody plays this type of music. I mean, through the 1980s or any kind of music for that matter, and the stories behind how the bands got together and the inspiration behind all these great tunes. Those stories are what really gels the show together, I think.
Well, it's I think what a lot of fans want to hear. Going all the way back to those early days, how it happened and how it formed, and it's always a cool thing to revisit that, and look back into the past, I guess.
Cinderella's triple platinum debut album, Night Songs, was such a huge success. I mean, it was at a point where it was selling like 50,000 copies a week at one point. And what was that like for you, Tom, personally?
Well, I always describe it as it's like this tornado swooped down and picked us up. And everything was happening so fast that you almost didn't even have time to really realize what was going on. Because the next thing we know, we're on a tour bus and we're touring, we're playing these big places, and it was just like magic, I mean, it just felt like, nothing was forced. It just all kind of happened, It's that feeling of like, the stars align or whatever, and you take off, and you have these just really cool things happening to you in your life, and it was just a really special time.
I saw the MTV music videos for both Shake Me and Nobody's Fool on YouTube this past weekend. Did you guys shoot those at the same time? Because it's kind of like it follows the same storyline.
Well, they were shot during the period of the record. They weren't shot back to back, but they were shot by the same director. All three videos for Night Songs were shot by the same director, and they have they incorporated that story of the wicked stepsisters, and they tied in the whole Cinderella theme and all. So.
And I love the band's lead-off single, Shake Me, but I absolutely love the tune, Nobody's Fool. It's one of my personal favorites. And tell me, Tom, the story behind the tune, Nobody's Fool.
Well, to me, that's just, I always write from a place of real emotions or real experiences. And, my heroes as musicians and singers and songwriters were people who wrote from real places, because they, the Stones and Zeppelin and Rod Stewart and people I grew up on, they all had, and their influences were American roots music. So it's all music about real things and real emotions. And that's where I learned how to write. So, and one of those very real emotions is, something that's very commonly written about is falling in love or falling out of love. And Nobody's Fool would be the second, emotion of falling out of love. So I can't really pinpoint any one relationship. A lot of times songs are cumulative of emotions because they're things that we all go through probably multiple times in our lives. And by that point in my life, I'd been through several breakups, quite a few. So, those emotions build up in you, and then one day they just come out. And that's really, that's what that song's about.
And I know once Cinderella's Night Songs debut album took America by storm, you guys took the world by storm, and you guys did a worldwide tour with Poison in 1986. Do you have any good stories from that tour that you remember, Tom, that we can say on the radio?
Well, we were, that was our very first tour, and we, I remember getting on a plane and flying to LA and getting on our first tour bus, meeting us at LAX, and it was like, wow, we're on a tour bus. And that was a 2 or 3 week run. It started in California and went down through, we played Phoenix and all the way over into Texas, too, part of it. Really, nobody knew who Cinderella or Poison were at the time, except for in our local areas. Mm-hmm. But our records had just come out, and we were actually both the support act for a band called Loudness.
Okay, yep.
And they were the headliner, and, we were playing like kind of mid-size, maybe 1,500-seat, 2,000-seat theater kind of places. And Poison and Cinderella would flip-flop each night. One night we'd go on first, then Poison, then Loudness, and then the next night it'd be Poison, Cinderella, Loudness. And we did like 3 weeks, and we became, met Poison at that time and became good friends. And actually, all through, the 3 studio albums and all the tours that we did and they did, we never toured together during that period of time, but we later started touring together again. We did 3 or 4 tours from 2000, 2002, and, but the relationship was formed back on that very first tour when no one knew who we were, and either of us, and we were the support acts for Loudness. So that was a very fond memory, being that it was the first tour that we had. It was like the first tour bus. It was the first everything that we ever experienced in terms of the touring life. So it was a lot of fun, and we experienced that with our friends Poison. So there's always been a good relationship between the two bands.
Cinderella's Long Cold Winter studio album was released, and Tom, I got to tell you, I really thought that album had more of a bluesier sound to it. Expand on that for me.
Well, I think that it's the more the production. I think that people perceived a change in the style from Night Songs to Long Cold Winter and then to Heartbreak Station. But it was really more of us, I think, expanding our production and instrumentation. The first record was very blues-based as well in terms of the melodies and the guitar riffs and vocal riffs. And as I mentioned, the lyric style was very, just down-to-earth about real things, Mm-hmm. So it was all, the writing always came from the blues scale, the blues style of lyrics and blues inspiration. But the first record was a little more basically produced. It was just more or less 2 guitars, bass, drums, boom, there you go. We started to bring in, within the same style of music and writing, we started to color the records more on the second record. We started bringing in piano and acoustic guitars and dobros and, and kind of painting a broader picture, if you will, with more colors on the record and the production itself. So I think to me, that's more the difference. And we started to try to, in the mix and in the sound, to make it less processed sounding, because Night Songs definitely had that flavor of the day, 80s, very processed, very slick, over-processed, I would say, mm-hmm. Sound that was very popular in the 80s. And we started to steer away from that immediately with Long Cold Winter and went a little more organic. And with that came the introduction of some very organic instruments like pianos and acoustic guitars and a lot of sounds that weren't on the first record. So to me, it was always more of a growth in the production and instrumentation than really a change in the writing style. And then it went a step further with Heartbreak Station, which is extremely dry and unprocessed. That's how I feel about the progression of the records in terms of what changed or grew. I like to consider it growth.
The band's ultimate best-selling single, one of my personal favorites that I grew up here in Los Angeles and heard on American radio all the time, Don't Know What You Got Till It's Gone. And I remember you guys were on tour and you would be lowered to the stage while playing like a white piano with that tune. Tell me about that experience in that song, Tom.
Well, the very first time I was on it, I remember being in pre-production meetings and saying, I want to come down out of the sky in a piano. And I wasn't thinking about maybe how scary that would be at first.
Yeah.
It's like this little platform with a grand piano on it. And so we got into rehearsals. We were in Louisville Gardens, I believe, is where we did our pre-production. It's the first time I'm on the piano. It's like all the house lights are on because there's no crowd there. It's us rehearsing and getting our production together, right? So the first time I go up there, it's like 30 feet in the air, and you're flying around on this little thing. And because all the house lights in the arena are on, you can see the floor, and you can see everything underneath you, right? So I'm getting a little white-knuckled up there, and they start to lower me down, and it was lowered by 3 motors that were up in the lighting rig. Mm-hmm. And one of the motors locked up, so it started to tilt. The whole platform started to tilt. Oh! And fortunately, we had some forethought, and the piano was bolted to the platform.
Right.
But I wasn't, so I'm hanging onto the piano for dear life. And to make matters worse, the rigger, who are the people who put all that stuff up every day, they swing around on those chains like Tarzan. It's nothing to them. They're not afraid of it. So he's like, "Oh, I'll fix it." And he jumps over and grabs one of the chains that's holding the piano like Tarzan, and now the whole thing just starts swinging.
Oh.
Because he had to come over and plug the motor back in. Apparently, that's what happened. So my very first experience on it was pretty frightening, but I quickly got over that. I had my own elevator in the back of the stage that would take me up to it, and a couple shows in, we were, I'd be with the production manager up there, and we'd be dancing across the catwalk in the dark, right, just laughing, so but the very first time up there was a little scary.
The tune Coming Home featured a 12-string guitar, and I love that guitar work on that song. And how did you guys come up with the idea to use that instrument for that great song?
Well, actually, that song was written, we were on tour. It was the End of Night Songs tour, and I had an endorsement with Gibson Guitar at the time, mm-hmm. and I kept hounding them to build me. I had a J200 6-string acoustic, and I said, "Can you guys make a 12-string with a giant body like that?" And, I don't know if they had never made one or they hadn't made one in a while, but I was like, I want a 12-string with a big body like a J200. So they made me one, and I remember we were out in California, and we were getting close to the end of the tour, so I was thinking about going home. Mm-hmm. And this big box arrives at my hotel, and it's my 12-string J200 from Gibson.
Wow.
And it was a day off. And I pulled the guitar out and I started playing it, and it just inspired me. And I wrote the song that day, in that hotel room. So
wow, great story, Tom. Great story. And
now we didn't use that guitar on the record,
right?
That 12-string sound is actually crafted from about 6 different tracks of guitars that Andy and Johns and I did that involved like Nashville tunings and stuff. But that's a whole other story. But the guitar initially that came from Gibson inspired the song. So
gotcha.
And plus the fact that it was towards the end of the tour and I was about ready to go home.
Cinderella kind of went their separate ways, and I know you were having some vocal issues, and but I know you're back, Tom. I'm hearing so much great media about you right now, and so just tell me about this great debut solo album, The Way Life Goes. Tell me about this.
Well, it started off not really being a record. Cinderella had signed a deal with a label that shall remain nameless, a big record label. And the deal, for whatever reason, didn't work out. This was after we had left Polygram, after the first 4 studio records. And we signed the deal around 1998. And the deal didn't work out. And long story short, it ended up in a big lawsuit and in the courts. And as a result of the legal hassles, we were restricted from recording together as a band for a number of years. So I started the solo record on the heels of that kind of legal catastrophe that happened to Cinderella. And my attitude was, I wasn't even thinking I was making a record. I started to work with just people who I liked to be around, and that I thought were very talented, one of them being my wife, Savannah, and a bunch of other songwriters here in town, and a producer here that I know, Chuck Turner, who helped with the record. And we just went out in our home studio, and it was like, the attitude was like, let's just make some music with no lawyers, no A&R guys, no record companies, nothing. Like, just make some music. So, right. So we'd record a few tracks, and, then Cinderella would get go out on tour, and I'd leave it for 6 months and come back and listen to them and fix this and save that and record a few more tracks. And basically, long story short, that's how the record came together over the period of about 10 years. And there were a lot of long breaks and months at a time that I walked away from it, which, gave me a lot of objectivity. And it was just, working with Savannah and a bunch of my friends here, musicians, songwriters, Chuck, who I mentioned, the producer. It was produced by Chuck, myself, and Savannah. I woke up one day, we've just kind of been kicking these songs around and recording a song here or there for nearly 10 years. And I just woke up one day and I was like, I got a record here. And that's really how we backed into it. And at that point it was like, well, I don't want to be in the record business, so let's go find a label.
Right.
And I think I had healed from all of the nonsense that had happened with the last label by that point. We shopped it around and we found this label that we're on now, who's amazing, Maravi Records, who's just been great, really been doing a great job with the record and very committed. So, that's how it happened. We just kind of stumbled into the record over a period of 10 years.
Right. Wow, that's crazy. Crazy. I knew there was a story behind it, Tom. So I'm glad we got that out. And
now they released the record last year, and then I put together a solo band, which are a bunch of incredible musicians and people from Nashville here, and we hit the road last year, and we've been touring, on and off, nonstop since last February.
Mr. Tom Keifer of Cinderella, thank you so very much. I really appreciate it, Tom.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and I would just like to say the show is going to be a good time. We're playing all the Cinderella hits as well as
cool
stuff, the singles off The Way Life Goes, and come out and check it out.